I want to welcome all of you to this is the second event in the Agility 2.0 series. This one is Learning Agility, Missions for Climate, Childhood, and Social Change. It's hosted by the Information and Knowledge Strategy program here at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. We'll have the next session coming up March the 31st, hosted by Human Capital Management on Is an Agile Culture Even Possible? Talk about that later. I'm Ed Hoffman. I'm a lecturer in the MS in Information and Knowledge Strategy program. I'm also CEO of Knowledge Strategies and former Chief Knowledge Officer of NASA. And I have the opportunity to moderate today's event. This is part of the ongoing series addressing agility. How do organizations leverage their expertise alongside the evolving tools and unforeseen events to successfully navigate our increasingly complex world? Our interdisciplinary discussions pull in faculty and guests from 3 other graduate programs besides IKNS. There's technology management, human capital management, and negotiation and conflict resolution. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. We have Asil Buhaji, who is the head of Global Knowledge Transfer, Abu Dhabi's Early Childhood Authority. This is a complex program committed to improving the lives of children. And Asil is a graduate of SPS from 2020. We also have Greg Robinson. Greg is the program director of the NASA James Webb Space Telescope. This stunning scientific global collaboration between NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency is transforming our understanding of the universe. And Greg is faculty with SPS. And we also have Tamika Vasquez, who's the head of marketing, Sidewalk Labs, an alphabet company, with a mission devoted to innovatively improving the urban infrastructure through technological solutions. Tamika is a graduate from 2016. I want to thank you all for joining us about this discussion about leadership in an age of knowledge, learning, and constantly changing work of evolution and virtuality and all the work that's going on. One of the things that all of you have in common is that the missions that you're a part of really have a lot to do with impacting society. Asil through the development of children, Greg through understanding the origins and the future of the universe, and Tamika through societal change. What I'd like to do is to start, and I'd start with Tamika, to perhaps describe your mission and the role that you play in it. So Tamika, what is it that is important about Sidewalk Labs for us to know, and what's the role that you play?
Yeah, thanks, Ed, and hey, everybody. Sidewalk Labs is a really interesting company in that it is not a typical technology company where we just produce products and hope that people buy them. The company is very focused on ensuring that the products that we are bringing to market can execute on some kind of social change, some kind of social innovations, whether that's looking at cost of living issues that you see and are very pervasive in societies across the world, or efficient transportation or energy use. When you think about everything we need to achieve from a sustainability perspective, the company is using technological solutions to solve these very real everyday core problems that we see in cities across the globe. So that's sort of what the company is about. And we are now officially part of Google. So we're able to really see that kind of scale and influence, at a company of that stature. It's a great time to be part of this kind of mission.
Just briefly, what is the role that you play for Sidewalk Labs in this mission?
Yeah, so my role is head of marketing. I was brought in not too long ago, just in August of 2021. And the role was really just to figure out how we tell the story about this concept of urban innovation. It's not a terminology that's widely used. And so just introducing people, decision makers, policy makers, people who are enthusiasts about the technologies themselves, everyday citizens like us just living in cities. Introducing this concept is half the battle. The other half of the battle is seeing to it that the products work, and we can continue to tell the stories of how those products are working and the impact that they're creating across the globe.
So improving cities, urbanization, Google, the use of technology, and how to use the narrative and story to support that social improvement. Let's go to you, Greg. Your mission has been very nicely featured in the news over the last few weeks. We thank you for timing this and for this panel. And why don't you describe a little bit about what you do in terms of James Webb Space Telescope and the purpose of the mission?
Thanks, Ed, and thanks to Columbia and SPS for having me. So James Webb Space Telescope launched on Christmas morning a month or so ago from Kourou, French Guiana. It's the follow-on to the Hubble Space Telescope that's been in operations for more than 30 years now, and it's brought us amazing images and better understanding of our universe. Webb is 100 times more powerful, if you could imagine that. And it's actually going to look back just over 13.6 billion years with a B, looking back close to the Big Bang. So we expect to see some of the early, oftentimes say the first galaxies forming in the universe, and that still blows my mind. So it's really going to help us understand our place in the universe, hopefully how we got here. We will also learn a lot about exoplanets, planets that we consider potentially habitable. And of course, we'll be able to look deep into planets within our own solar system, planets like Mars, and see deep into the atmospheres and storms and things like that. But the big one is really looking back beyond 13.5 billion years. And it's an infrared telescope, so it can see much further, much clearer in space than Hubble can. So really looking forward to the images. We're still in commissioning phase, which we do all the checkouts, turn on instruments, focus the mirrors, and that whole process, amazingly, takes about 6 months. So in late June, we're looking to start the whole science operations phase of it. So I'm the program director. I came on 4 years ago. These major, what we call flagship missions, take a long time to develop. Webb was in development more than 20 years. But if you're going for bold science, you have to do bold missions. A lot of new technology, a lot of engineering expertise and challenges you have to get through, plus budgets and stakeholders, internal and external to the agency. And you mentioned our international partnerships. So one of my biggest roles is really to ensure we have alignment. You hear me talk about alignment a lot. Alignment with the project at the centers, with the industrial base across the globe, with our external stakeholders, OMB at the White House and Congress. That's where our budgets come from. And of course, with our international partners with ESA and the Canadian Space Agency.
Thank you, Greg. So we'll hear more about this mind-boggling 13.5 billion years, being able to go back there. So we're covering improving the universe or understanding it, cities, and probably most important is children. I mean, I think most of you would agree that children are essential for everything. And so ASIL is based in Abu Dhabi. And can you describe a little bit about the mission of Early Childhood Authority, the efforts in Abu Dhabi, and your role?
Yes, of course. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to this series. I'm really happy to be here with everyone. Greg, I had the opportunity to meet you as part of the IKNS program back in 2018. So it's really good to be here. So the Early Childhood Authority was established in 2019 by the royal family and our leaders who are also part of our team. Their Highnesses, the daughters and the son of the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. And that was based on the need for us to really look at the optimal and most holistic child development from all different angles of their development that cuts across early care and education, healthcare, family support, and child protection. And so the mission is really purposeful. And my role within the entity, which I've joined almost 2 years ago, is to lead a global change initiative called the World Early Childhood Development Movement. And I co-lead this initiative with a fantastic group of people to really focus my efforts on cultivating 3 knowledge activities of developing new technical early childhood development knowledge, creating and retaining a new knowledge network, and innovatively disperse knowledge across the ECD ecosystem.
So again, a focus on what's important, all of us around improving the life of our children, around health, around development, creating the knowledge, being able to retrieve it, and being able to make it available to people is one of the things you're doing. All 3 of you are connected to, the kinds of work that if someone says you're leading this, my first reaction would be, how do I start? How do you even get this kind of a thing going? And so maybe continuing with Asil, how do you know that you're going in the right direction when you're leading something this large? And what are the steps that you need to consider when the outcomes are just very distant and far out? How do you get it started?
Yeah, that's a very important question, Ed. I think we often talk about future generations and the future of humankind, and we hear these buzzwords here and there, and it's mostly emphasizing how imperative it is to invest in people. And with my work in the sector I'm serving, we go back to the basics of how we truly invest in human development. For almost the past 2 years, I've been singing the Heckman Curve song. And for those of you who do not know who James Heckman is, he's a Nobel Prize winning American economist who suggested through his work that the highest rate of economic returns comes from the earliest investment in early childhood development. And his motto really presents that the economic return on investment ranges between $6 to $17 per single dollar invested. So by providing a kind of like an eye-opening understanding that societies usually tend to invest so much money at later stages of development, when it's really often too late to provide any substantial value, investing in the early years and really building skill upon skill to provide that greater success for children can yield not only a greater productivity, but also reduce the social spending on societies. And so once I kind of cracked that and I understood the magnitude of possibilities, I began to appreciate the path, knowing that the outcomes, even though might take generations to materialize and to reflect the anticipated social change, I at least I'm in a position in a position to influence atomic, sociocultural and economic nudges.
So one of the things I'm hearing, one of the things that's interesting, I think you cited Heckman about the importance of early investment in children. And one of the things that is interesting to me that we know one of the principles of good program and project management is that you want to start right early. Because if you don't start right, it goes, and so you have that human project, I guess technology, kind of a connection there. Part of also what you're saying is just understanding the issue. You don't just jump into it. You understand the studies, you understand the research, you understand how to proceed, and you tap into experts, who are working this issue.
Absolutely, yeah.
We go to Mika. It seems like you're in a kind of an early phase, a startup phase. How do you get your hands around, knowing the direction is the right direction for Google, for urban, innovation in cities? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that question a little bit more generally than just within the context of Sidewalk Labs or Google, because the same notion applies to startups in general, right? So if you're a startup and you are thinking about how you can start to intersect the technology that you're bringing to market with something that you think really matters in the world, so some kind of social innovation, some kind of social change, ultimately it begins with you being able and willing to think beyond current realities. And I think that that is always the starting point, because if you don't envision that the world tomorrow can fundamentally look different than the world today, you're not going to be able to be creative. You're not going to be able to really take advantage of the true essence of innovation, which is all about stretching current realities. It's all about looking at creating new choice, new mindsets, new perspectives. And so that's where everything starts. And you'll start to see that as you research and as you are actually iterating the product or service that you're providing, you'll know if it's working, because it'll start to shift how the conversation is happening. It'll start to shift the ecosystem around you. Competitors are going to start to pop up. And that's when you really know that you're onto something.
It's interesting. So it's, in some ways, you're starting about the starting point is understanding how to shift the current realities. I like that term, shifting current realities, being able to go beyond the current situation, innovation, new ideas. You're describing kind of an entrepreneurial mindset for these kinds of missions. And a way of tracking it is the kind of conversations, whether other competitors in the field are getting interested in this. And obviously that's nicely connected to part of your theme of narrative story and getting the word out. So let's go to Greg. You took over a mature program. The James Webb Space Telescope had been running for quite a while. How did you approach it when you are trying to get a sense of your own direction of where it needs to go and the outcomes you're looking for as someone who stepped into an already mature type mission?
I think whether you're starting from the beginning or any phase of a mission, as the late Marvin Collins used to say, you start off today with the end in mind. So, of course, students will always hear me talk about the importance of planning. That's kind of a common thing. So you do the planning. What's the end point? What do we need to do to get there? What does the industrial base look like? What do the partners bring to the table? How can we change that to improve the mission? If you go way back, we have a 6.5 meter size mirror telescope, and Hubble with 18 different segmented mirrors. Hubble has a 2.4 meter telescope, still huge, but 6.5 is breathtaking when you see the size of it. And there's no rocket in the world, no rocket fairing can launch that. It won't fit inside that. So we needed that size mirror to get the science we wanted. So there were some constraints against that. We wanted the telescope side of the satellite to be extremely cold, looking off into deep space in the darkness and coldness of space. But of course, there's something called our star, our sun, that makes things very hot. And same for the Earth and the moon. So I had to protect it from light and from heat. So we needed to build a sun shield that's never been built before of that size, tennis court size with 5 different layers. That's not trivial at all with a new technology material. And of course, that won't fit within a rocket fairing. So no way to launch this thing. So how do we build it in segments so we can fold it up and put it inside of a fairing and launch it, and then unfold it in space? There were many other hurdles like that. So you have to have that endpoint in mind. So that influences your design, your planning, and how do we test this thing? So you have to have the whole verification and validation program, or test program in mind. So you know what you do about analysis, about testing, by similarity or heritage, et cetera. Some say there's no such thing as heritage in this business. So start off today with the end in mind, do your planning. I often say run all of the simulations with all the scenarios from now to the end point, and you will find a lot of gaps in what you need to do when you go and fill those gaps. So that's the big piece. So when I came in 4 years ago, things were pretty mature. The program was going through some challenging times, technically and programmatically, and with stakeholders. So I took the same look. What's the end point? We have to get this thing out of the US to South America, put it on a rocket and get it launched. That was my whole goal and objectives. Every decision I made was around that, and had to keep the stakeholder confidence, which involved a lot of transparency, even Even the baby was ugly sometimes, had to tell that story. But people got really comfortable once they knew we were open, honest, transparent. They always knew the status. There are a lot of details in what I'm saying. So those are the big points. Start off the day with the end in mind, build your plan, simulate it, and transparency.
Good, Greg. We have a follow-up, one of the questions, and for those of you watching, I would encourage you to use this as an opportunity to reach out, ask questions to Asil and Tamika and Greg. First one we have is specific to James Webb, Greg. And the question from Greg is James Webb Space Telescope program in a new phase, or is this the flying phase for a new program? So I guess the question is, what's the phase of where James Webb is in its life cycle?
So the traditional terminology was still in development until we get it checked out and operational, and then it goes into the operations phase. So if you look at a traditional PMI type life cycle, we're in phase D, and that's the last phase of INT. And then phase E is once we're in operations. So that's where we are today, finishing up development, what we call commissioning, checking it out on orbit to get it ready for phase E.
And I'm also smiling because Greg teaches in the program on leading complex programs. Who's better to talk about that? And so many of the principles you're talking about are covered, obviously, in that course as you teach. Want to follow that up. All of you in different ways, I think, are working global missions. And one of the things that we cover in IKNS, and I'm sure in all the courses, is things are complex as you get more people involved and stakeholders, right? And so from the standpoint of leading something that's complex or a global mission, such as Asil, what you're doing with ECA and the focus on children, I know it's targeted around Abu Dhabi, but I think there's lessons for other societies around that. How do you design, how do you lead something that has so many stakeholders, that's global, that has a lot of natural uncertainty into it? Any thoughts on your approaches for that, Asil?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I've been contemplating on this question for some time, actually. But it comes to no surprise that one of the very first thing that one would think about is the need for effective and efficient delivery teams. And however, and I think in social change missions, it really takes a team that believes in the purpose. In working knowledge terms, we refer to it as sharing a common vision. However, one that connects all the different dimensions of the story, but it really does take a story, a propelling one to begin with. And during my first couple of months at the authority, I used to kind of catch my bosses in external meetings when we're meeting external agencies and government officials, and super hungry for effective collaboration. Say, team, it takes a village to raise a child. And it almost instantly hits the spot and sparks the sense of responsibility. And before you know it, you've already added a new character into the story. And I found that quite captivating and really extremely powerful when you're trying to get people to be connected to the purpose and see eye to eye with you on the need for social change. The other aspect, I think, is just like Tamika was referring to kind of like the startup scene. And we often hear, especially entrepreneurs, talk about the need of falling in love with the problem as opposed to falling in love with the solution. And I find that this is extremely powerful also when tackling social change missions. Identifying the core problems and falling in love with them is extremely important, because I found that at times when teams tend to slip and go into conflicts, frustrations do build up, and then in many instances start to switch courses that are so far away from the initial mandate. And so what I found quite grounding, Ed, in my experience is that one of the most powerful components that was evident to keep the ball rolling was the problem. And in our books at the ECA was, how can we ensure that every young child is seen, heard, and served? And so I think that is very, very powerful. And also from kind of like the management side of things, I also think that the mission-based management is a key principle in designing complex missions. When grounded in a mutual sense of purpose, all members of the organization, whether it's a kind of top to bottom, leaders and followers, lead their work in an explicitly connected manner to the broader aims of the organization. And I've seen that exhibited so beautifully with our management. I mean, they're part of our regular weekly meetings, but not only do they join our meetings, they really have the ear to identify and resolve bottlenecks confronted by the delivery teams, and also not only identify them, but roll up their sleeves, join the crew. And really, this is when I've seen real magic happen.
Yeah, it connects to, I remember you recently as a student, maybe not that recent, a few years back, but in the opening foundations of knowledge course, we really start with a heavy focus. It's about the people, right? It's about the connections and talking and never forgetting that, and collaborative leadership, which really gets into a lot of the essential nature of, we can talk about these complex technologies. We talk about the scope of the mission and the funding and all that activities. How does it come down to how do we collaborate effectively together? I think is one of the things that I'm hearing. We have a question from Deborah. And I think this fits in with all of you, but particularly with Tamika. It's around innovation. And the question is, these excellent innovations identify a change in mindset and processes. What's the biggest barrier to making this level of change? And what would you advise leaders to accomplish for true innovation? So as you were saying, Tamika, the thing is to change the script and to create new ways of moving forward. What's the biggest barrier that you run into, and what advice do you give?
Such an excellent question. I'll break it down into two main areas. I would say the first half of the battle is what my colleagues on this webinar have suggested already, which is that communication, right? And then earlier I talked about the element of storytelling and creating those narratives and sort of creating definitions around things so that people know what it is that you're trying to do and can recognize it when they see it, even outside of the context of your company, right? So the communication is super important. And I think part of the challenge and why a lot of companies or leaders may struggle with this is because they're not always able to meet people where they are when it comes to that communication, right? So if you look at so much of technological advancement is very Western driven and it is very Western oriented, right? So as a result of that, our communication styles are increasingly sort of Westernized. And that's not going to be effective as we look at, how the world is evolving now. It's creating more access around the world with more people having, Wi-Fi or, social media channels to their disposal and things like that. It's not going to help if we can't bring a significant population of the world along with us. And so we have to meet them where they are when it comes to how they understand things, the kind of languages that they feel most accustomed to, how language is able to help us be more emotive in our communication. Half the battle, as you all know, when it comes to communication is really being able to speak in a way that is emotionally intelligent and emotionally sensitive. And sometimes language is a barrier to that. So just really being deeply rooted in colloquialisms and linguistics that might be more core to a local region is critical if you want them to believe in what they're doing, believe in what they're buying from you as a leader, whether it's an idea or a product or a service. So the communication is like a huge chunky piece of this, but I think it really boils down to us not being too arrogant, right, in the ways that we introduce new ideas and sort of talk through current realities with our global counterparts. I would say the second part to that is really trying to be a little bit more sensitive to macro forces. The concept of a macro force would be, if you think about economics or environment, so the actual physical environment that we're in, or political elements that are existing across the world. You have to look at all of these kind of macro forces and how they are at play, given what you're trying to introduce to the market or to the wider world. So if I don't really understand your local geography, I don't understand, the political ramifications of things that I might be introducing to you. I'm not sensitive to your maturity when it comes to technological adoption. It's going to be really hard to forge change, right? So while we want to sort of move fast, I think we need to sometimes take a step back and just move more intentionally, because if the idea is to bring people along, it's not going to be sort of cornered in what is popular in the West all the time. That's not going to always work. And so we really want to be pragmatic in how we communicate and how we are tackling various issues of social change and social innovation when it comes to some of those macro forces that may be at play, given the city or the county or the region or the country that you're most interested in collaborating with. And I use that word collaborating very intentionally, right? We don't want to inject ourselves, we want to collaborate.
Yeah, I love that answer because it connects. We hear so much, and just a couple of weeks ago, we were doing one of our courses, Navigating the Future of Work, and one of the sessions was about the importance of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. The fact that particularly where work is, where it's going, has to include different ways of seeing things, different backgrounds. Most of the work is global now. And so I think you kind of nicely articulated that's a challenge, but that's something that has to be honestly and respectfully addressed. It seems also to lead nicely to you, Greg, from Deborah's original question of your work is about innovation, true innovation. And what are the barriers that you have to deal with to get people comfortable to change, to do things a different way? And what advice do you have related to that?
So I want to add one thing to Tamika's response. I thought it was perfect. Certainly when you're talking about global collaboration, meeting people where they are, was NASA is certainly the standard for the world when it comes to space exploration. However, places like the European Space Agency and the French Space Agency, and the list goes on, they're very good at what they do as well. And so as part of the collaboration was to make sure we appreciated what everyone brought to the table from their perspective and not try to put the NASA flavor on it. That's not easy, as you probably know, Ed. And just an example of that, once we launched on Christmas morning and we separated from the rocket, I think most people saw that separation, the video, and certainly the solar rays deployed, which we did not expect to see on video. Just amazing. So 2 years ago, those cameras were not planned to be on board. That's not what ESA does, and that's not what Ariane 5, Ariane 6, the next vehicle, will have it. They just haven't done that. So as part of my collaboration was, geez, we have to see separation, not just because it's pretty, but it gives the mission operations team a lot of information in the event of something not going exactly as planned. So it took some real collaboration to get that done. But at the end of the day, I've been to Paris a few times, but got my counterparts to the US to launch down at the Kennedy Space Center, February of 2020, right before pandemic and flights stopped. And that's where we really created the agreement to put these cameras on. But it was based on relationship and meeting them where they were versus trying to force it on. So as far as the innovation piece, I see it in three different levels. I talked about technology maturation, that's innovation. Turning these things into a workable system, that's innovation. We do great at those. Where we tend to struggle is change in culture, change in environment, and change in the way of doing business. So for a big mission like ours, it takes a long time to get to what I think sometimes is a simple solution. Now, technically it's complex, but we tend to fall back into take as much time as you need, do all of these design of experiments, extra studies, do some non-flight units to get to the flight unit. And I think about the early Apollo days where they, design, build, test, and fly, design, build, test, and fly. And they did a lot of those in 1 year and got to the moon in a short period of time. So the challenge is shifting the thought process back to the Apollo era thinking. And we know a lot of our industry partners, all the names out there that have emerged. I won't say emerging anymore. So a lot of our commercial industry partners, they operate more like that Apollo era than we do at NASA. So I think for all endeavors, not just space, we have to think that way. Really lean forward, be innovative, but don't let innovation slow you down.
Yeah, so much what all of you are talking about is the importance of the mindset, the importance, if you will, about the human, the person, and those kinds of requirements and respect for the different ideas. And that if you get that right, then the technology, the innovation flows, from that. I have another question that I'll stay this time with you, Greg. It's from Magdalena. And this is really, I guess, a tech transfer type question for you, Greg. Would you be able to talk to any of the kind of new potential technologies that are being developed either for web or that will come out of that? So it's the application. What will we be able to do better? What are the kind of tools and technologies, innovations that might come out of web? I know there's going to be a lot, but maybe you can give us a couple of examples of what you're hoping will be discovered.
So that's a really good question. So first, Webb has 10 new technologies, never been flown before. Some never been designed before. That's unprecedented. I mean, if we have 2 or 3 innovative technologies, that's a huge step. And 10 plus building these things into a complex system. So there are so many areas. So I think of transfer within the space industry. That's one, but I'm thinking more consumer industry in this case. So from a consumer industry standpoint, we use a lot of beryllium. So we're very big, but you can't have too much mass. That's a problem for the rocket as well. So we're twice the size of Hubble, but half the mass or weight. So if you look at a material like beryllium, it's 6 or 7 times stronger and more stable than steel, but lighter than aluminum. So just selecting certain materials for mass, for thermal properties, other things like that. Many of these things can be transformed or transferred into medical. When you think of things like hip replacements and other types of joint replacements, very lightweight, very strong, very stable material. And of course, the medical industry is using a lot of materials that came out of space already. So that's one area. In our optics area, that's another innovation on Webb. Doctors are already using some of that new optics technology to prepare for eye surgery. So it's changing hours of waiting after testing to things you can learn in seconds, so you can get on with it. So I'm sure many more things will come out of this. Those are 2 examples. I mentioned the sun shield. Many companies today with sneaker technology and jacket technology, and the list goes on. Swimming technology, you see swimsuits, always a debate in the Olympics about the type of material, right? So just think of the sun shield as one example. Perhaps some of that material can be used in many consumer applications going forward. Those are just a few.
So stand by. There's a lot more coming.
Stand by.
We have a question from Alex, who's talking about stories and narrative. Probably give this to Mika and Asil to maybe start. But his question is, when you personally are experiencing difficulties or things are going hard, are there any stories, or is there a story that you return to that helps inspire you to get through tough times? And so it's kind of a personal one about, do you have a story that motivates you, inspires you for getting through when things are very challenging or difficult. I'll start with you, Tamika, just because one of the things you're talking about is, as the head of marketing, that it's so important to create a story that is that's powerful to kind of shift any thought on that. It's a unique question.
Yeah, it's such a great way of thinking. Struggling to come up with like a specific story, but one thing I will say that I've grown to appreciate, and it is a sort of narrative and a worldview that I think has taken me not only through, matters of work and business and kind of thinking about marketing and using words very intentionally, but also just in my personal life. So I come from a culture that is very diverse in and of itself. I was born in a country called Guyana, which is a home for people of different racial backgrounds, different ethnicities, different languages, different religions. And I was raised on a small island called Saint Martin in the Dutch Caribbean, which is basically the kind of place people go to and decide they don't want to leave after a few days on vacation. And so you have people that come from all over the world. And when my family immigrated to the United States, we actually moved to New York. So, I haven't left New York since, but so you can imagine my entire life has been about kind of this kind of deep cultural affiliation with a lot of different people. And so the stories that, have raised me were more about values and more about sort of ways of thinking and ways of thinking about your role in the world. So it's so much rooted into some of the proverbs and some of the mantras or common sayings that your grandmother or mother or anyone in your life, the elders in your life, would often impart on you. So those are the things that I keep in mind. And I'm really not just saying that, I truly believe that, because when it comes to, being able to look ahead, first of all, I have to operate with the assumption that the world I live in today is not going to be the same world that I wake up to tomorrow. And I think that's a great thing. I have to be conscious about cultural elevation. I have to be sensitive to social dynamics. I have to think about things like language. I ended up telling you guys a little bit about that earlier. And so all of those things, I think, just by virtue of how I was raised in the cultural background that I have, it's a very unique one that I'm very privileged to have, but it's allowed me to sort of look at, how information is spread, how stories are spread, how ideas are spread. It's allowed me to kind of bring a broader context into the work that I do every day.
Yeah. So it's interesting, your different journeys, your travels, your experiences create that kind of a, understanding and becomes that ongoing inspiration. It sounds like. I'd ask that to Cecile or Greg, either of you. How do you stay inspired when things are difficult? And any thoughts on that?
I can answer that. I think for me, it's really simple. I was once a kid. I have gone, and so all of us were. So I was once a kid, and I have picked up so many different lessons along the way. I was part of different experiences. So it's not hard for me to connect with the purpose of saying that a lot of things that I have learned and things that I would consciously want to unlearn has to stop with me. Like for me, it's breaking the cycle. And there are times that work becomes really tough. Sometimes you just feel due to conflict and due to people not seeing eye to eye with you and having different agendas, you almost feel separated from that purpose. But what grounds me every time is literally just walking back home and seeing my nieces and nephews who live home with us. So in our culture, we are all about extended families. So it isn't hard for me for the role I carry and the work I do to look at them and say, I'm contributing to their own future. And it really takes me picking up myself in the morning and showing up and staying connected to that purpose. So I think if I was to sum up my story, it's really that interconnectedness with myself. It's the reason why in the broader scheme of my own life, and then saying that whatever is bound to happen in the future can start with me believing that the cycle needs to be broken right here for a better change.
Yeah, I like that. You know, again, you're talking about the cultural influences, your culture, your values, your family, your society, and how that impacts you, and that creates your story of motivation. Greg, anything you'd like to add about how do you stay inspired when things are difficult?
So I would say just my normal or natural outlook. It's always fairly positive, very positive actually. So I was born and partially raised in the segregated South in the U.S. And for some of you that means some tough times, right? For a lot of reasons. I can tell you in elementary school through fourth grade, when schools were still segregated, where I grew up in Southern Virginia, had some of the best teachers in the world to this day. So a lot of toughness with compassion kind of put me on a path. So as schools were desegregated, the way it's always been competitive, regardless of what I was doing. So the way I competed in class in desegregated schools really paved the way. It showed that what those teachers had done early on in shaping me actually made me feel like I could do anything. And then many other experiences over life growing up and in my early career and going through college, some tough times too. Getting through all of that, excuse me, most of the issues I face today just pale in comparison. And you know, being a religious guy, I still pray, which is pretty important. I know other people use different means to draw on similar things, but that's still helpful for me.
Yeah, and I would say, having worked with Greg for probably about 30 years, you are one of the most relaxed people I've ever known. Been in situations where things were falling apart, leaders were screaming, and Greg would say, "Well, this is an opportunity for us to get better," and with that smile. So that's a great attitude. We're getting a lot of great questions. I'll come back to this, but one of the things I want to get into is all of you seem to be involved in work that really has a lot to do with social change, social responsibility, improving society. That to me is one of the common aspects that are really important. Peter Drucker, the eminent management theorist, said that all organizations have to find ways of avoiding their own self-interest and find ways to help society improve. What recommendations can you give to other organizations or people who want to look to answer Drucker's call for social responsibility and looking to do things that fix society's current problems? Any thoughts on that? And we'll start with our marketing person, Tamika. I know a lot of your interests, as long as I've known you, have been in terms of improving society, social responsibility, connecting the outcome of an organization with benefit. How do people get started in that? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we have, for better or worse, decided that capitalism is kind of the way of society and sort of our point of exchange of goods and services and ideas. I've been holding the belief for some time now that companies, by virtue of that, are more powerful than governments, you know, when it comes to their ability to potentially accelerate some of the social or cultural change that we want to see. One of the things that I've always been fascinated by is just how much is learned accidentally just by nature of being in a business, right? So you may be a company that, I don't know, is in the retail industry, or maybe you're a social media company. It doesn't matter. Like any industry that you may be in, what you'll find is as you're in the course of doing business and you're introducing products or services to the marketplace is responding in a variety of ways. You are using that insight and those points of feedback and incorporating it into other products and services. But simultaneously, there's a lot that you just kind of learn accidentally. And I think that, you know, history has really shown that it's the unintentional findings really, that have led to some of the development of very notable things. Like off the top of my head, the potato chip was an accident, Post-it notes were accidents, the pacemaker was an accident. And I just think it's super interesting and super fascinating, So I think as a business, part of your responsibility is not just some of the stuff that we talked about earlier, like really being intentional and stuff like that. That matters a ton, but it's also like paying attention to the stuff that you're learning. And we covered a ton of this in the IKNS program, not to make a plug, but seriously, we really dug into organizational knowledge in the greatest depth that we could. And what I realized was, companies like Facebook, for example, they're not in the business of depression and mental illness, but they know a lot by accident about depression and mental illness. Companies like Starbucks could actually tell us a lot about housing or gentrification, because that's usually the signal that leads to them opening up a shop in different cities across the country and across the world. The fashion industry could tell us a lot about CO2 pollution and landfill waste and all of these things. So there's a lot that you come across accidentally. And I think as a business, part of your responsibility is to recognize that you have a lot of power, recognize that there are things that you're trying to do on purpose, but there are things that you are going to learn along the way. How do you then use that insight, that knowledge to create some kind of social change? Should you not align yourself to the opportunity to create change as you see it? So I'll stop there, but it's such a deep and interesting topic to me.
Yeah, and I love that notion of fortuitous accidents. I agree with my experiences is that when we're not focused on linear things, we open ourselves up to the possibilities. And almost, I think it connects with your message, Greg, about staying positive and taking on things and moving forward. Any other thoughts about that from Asil or Greg before we go on to another question?
So I would say the a hot potato called climate. We know that our world is it's getting hot. It's actually it's accelerating. The rate of change is much faster than it was 5 years ago and 10 years ago and even yesterday. We know that there's a huge debate around how much is caused by humans. What can we do about it? Who cares anyhow? So as we go off and look for other habitable planets, we only have one that's the most important, and that's this one. And the challenge is, how do we get organizations, whether commercial governments, countries, to really align around making sure that this Earth, this planet, will still be habitable and healthy for our grandkids and future generations to come. So many of the things that we do today have some amount of impact, good and bad. We certainly have tools and instruments that we didn't have many years ago that we can actually monitor progress and even look at some of the causes and locations of causes. We certainly know places like when we talk about Guyana and French Guiana, that whole Amazon area, which is the largest place in the world, certainly in this hemisphere, that helps us with ozone. It's being devastated by the hour. And there are many places around the globe like that. That's just one example. There are many others with carbon footprints. So with all of this knowledge we have and the tools and the money and the will, this place we call home, what I would call the destruction of it is accelerating right before our eyes. So how do we get people to see, or certain organizations to see these things as they're happening right before our eyes? And again, with the end in mind, is keeping it safe for our grandkids and future generations. Don't have a good answer. Maybe one of the bright students in SPS will come up with some good answers that can get governments and other organizations better aligned so we can protect ourselves.
Yeah, well, that's also a good connection. I realize we're with 5 minutes left, but Asil, I know one of the passions when you were a student was getting more involved in helping your society in the government in Abu Dhabi for social improvements, and anything you wanted to add personally about how you bring this into your life and work.
Yes, of course. I truly appreciate the responses from Tamika and Greg, and I think from a government perspective, and now that I have been on the government side, I just want to build on Ducker's view on social responsibility. And there's one thing that resonated with me, which is government can't do it all. And I think, Greg, to your question, I don't know how to go about it. I think it really takes two to tango, and it's truly the public to private partnerships, because through these partnerships we can transform and expedite the response to social problems. Some of those examples, and it has been also exhibited in Abu Dhabi. And it's basically one of the things that a UK-based social finance limited coined as a social impact bond, or for a more fun term, pay for success financing, is something that we have seen quite evident and quite successful, where organizations leverage outcome-based contracts in which private investors provide pre-financing for social problems, and then the private sector agencies pay back investors their principal plus, of course, the return if these programs deemed to be successful. So I think that we'll be able to improve sustainability, collaboration, of course, support economic affordability, and most importantly, really boost social accountability across all players within the broader community ecosystem.
Absolutely. So down to the final 2 minutes, no more than 30 seconds. Anybody want to add anything before we close down? Any final 20 seconds of advice, Greg, for what you would emphasize?
Nothing to add as far as recommendations.
Okay.
I've certainly enjoyed this. It's been amazing with the co-panelists, Tamika and Asil. I've learned a lot as well. And Ed, with you leading this, I appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here.
Oh, thank you, Greg. Tamika, 20, 30 seconds, anything you would like to point out, close, or reference?
Yeah, I'll close in saying that good citizenship is fun. It can be fun. I promise you can do well and do good simultaneously. We don't have to live in a binary world. And to the extent that you can start to think ahead, pick a date in the future, and just really not be afraid to think too far ahead, short-term thinking isn't going to get us where we want to be. So I'll leave with that and hope that's a point of encouragement for you all. Thank you.
Very good. Asil, 10, 20 seconds. Any final thing you want to say?
I just wanted to say that I've completely enjoyed my time here. I'm honored to be alongside you, Ed. It's always fun to join your sessions. Greg, Tamika, I mean, I have learned so much more from you. I was kind of like taking notes on my laptop as well as we were talking, because there is definitely a learning for each one of us here. And I look forward to meet you all in person and in other events, hopefully.
All right. Well, let's thank Asil, Greg, Tamika. I've loved this discussion. We have not been able to get to all the questions, but that perhaps a future time. For those of you interested in the Information Knowledge Strategy Program, there's more. You can join a February 8th online information session to hear about the program. And the next one of these sessions on Agility 2.0 is March the 31st, with speakers from the Human Capital Management Program discussing, is an agile culture even possible? I thank all of you. Have a great rest of your day.